I'm Patty Stonesifer, and I started at Microsoft in 1988 and stayed until 1997. Microsoft was changing so much during that period that I started out as a leader in Microsoft Press, moved to leading Microsoft Canada, moved to leading Microsoft Product Support, and my end role was the head of what was then the Consumer Division, ultimately the Interactive Media Division. I'm the sixth of 9 children, born in Indianapolis, Indiana. My father was a car salesman. My mother was a physical therapist. Well, I think in some ways being sixth of 9 children prepared me for the time at Microsoft. I had 5 brothers. I had 3 sisters. Holding your own at the dinner table required a certain kind of confidence and assertion. So I learned those skills early. I had to learn how to collaborate, but also stand out. And that was something that happened at the dinner table. When I was young, there was this doll called the Chatty Cathy. And they pulled the string out the back and she spoke, and that was a great technological phenomena to have this voice box inside of this doll. And they often called me Chatty Patty because as the child in the middle, I was very articulate and wanted to make sure that you knew I was there. So I think I was a pretty expressive child. But I was a bit of a free thinker because in a family of 9, there's a lot of structure, there's a lot of rules. And, there were 2 of us that really wanted to kind of go our own way. So I was both very chatty, but also asking a lot of questions from day one. I went to Butler because it was a couple of blocks away from my family's home, and I didn't have any money for college. And I walked in, and they gave me a scholarship based on both my grades and my potential. And I edited the yearbook right away. I worked in the cafeteria. I really was scrambling to put together enough money to even stay in school. And so I made the donuts every morning, and you were allowed to eat as many of the donuts as you could in process. And I survived on glazed donuts for a couple of years, and then eventually did drop out and got married and moved to the West Coast. After my first son was born, I went back. We had moved back to Indiana, and I went to the Indiana University, Purdue University, Fort Wayne Extension, and completed my degree in general studies just to get the degree because they didn't have a journalism degree. My work at Butler was in journalism. I was always fascinated with journalism, but ended up writing in the technology space almost immediately because that was a better job and better money. I entered the corporate world as a corporate writer, but technology was coming on fast, and there weren't very many people with CS degrees, and I had a very analytical mind. I just hadn't been trained in computer science, and I found that they needed technology writers and began to write technology and then began to teach technology fairly quickly in Santa Barbara. I taught COBOL. I would literally learn what I needed to learn the week before I ended up teaching it because we were bringing in people from the community, from UC Santa Barbara and other places who had music degrees or affinity in some ways to teach them to be programmers because there was such an absence of the number of programmers we needed. And it was some years before the universities were turning out enough supply to meet the demand for technology. So I was lucky in that I found it fascinating. I had some skills in writing that were necessary. And I pretty much spent the rest of my career in technology kind of walking the line between the people who were deeply embedded in the technical aspects and the people who were trying to utilize and understand and build businesses or families with technology. And that kind of middle way became the kind of contributing space that I was able to perform best in. My early career was as a tech writer, and then I became a trainer in what was, I think they were called information centers. Again, the bridge between this new microcomputing technology coming on and corporate use of it. And I was at United Technologies and writing how-to and teaching courses for executives and finance folks, et cetera, about how to use mainframes or mini computers to do everything from financial analysis to corporate bookkeeping of all kinds. And there was a computer book publisher in Indianapolis that came knocking and asked whether I would consider joining them. It was called Q Corporation. So I became the editor-in-chief and then publisher at Q Corporation in Indianapolis. And that's where I was when Microsoft decided to look for some grown-ups to add to their leadership suite in 1987, 88. And I was 30 years old and really thought of as a grown-up at Microsoft. My first encounter was with Microsoft folks who we were at Q Corporation writing books about. But I was really impressed with the folks at Microsoft, and apparently someone there was impressed enough with me that they made that call and said, would you come run Microsoft Press? I was at Microsoft Press a relatively short period of time, maybe a year and a half, and there was an executive retreat where the very top executives would each identify one person from their organization that they thought had future leadership potential, and Microsoft was growing very fast, and so there was always a need to be moving people into new roles. And I was chosen as someone to go to this retreat, not as an exec, but as one of the people of promise, I guess you'd say. In that process, I got noticed enough that within a week after coming back from that retreat, they asked me about moving into the international area and taking over, at that time, Microsoft Soviet Union, but that ended up with so much change that I ended up in Microsoft Canada. I was originally in repair mode to repair corporate relationships, repair employee culture, but then we were able to build. We literally built a new headquarters. We built new relationships. Microsoft's software suite was growing more and more important in the banking industry in Canada, but we were also going through an important shift from backing OS/2 to making the change to Windows, and the banking customers were really unhappy because change is not something, if you're running a big bank, that you want. And so I had to really learn how to lead through the kind of change that has enormous impact on people's businesses and people's reputations, because the people who had insisted that OS/2 was the answer in that bank felt really bad when Microsoft changed its mind and the answer was Windows. And we had a lot of selling to do, both on staff, but also in the greater business community across Canada. I was lucky enough to have a guy named Richard Tate fly in, a wonderful, wonderful man. Flew in and went with me to bank after bank after bank to talk about how Windows would be better for their business long term. And we eventually managed to retain and switch and build up all of those customers. But the partnership with the product group coming in to stand with the sales leadership, which is what really being a subsidiary manager is. You're a sales leader and relationship leader at that point in the evolution of Microsoft, was really important and was the ideal kind of Microsoft internal partnership. I remember Mike Hallman coming to Canada for our holiday party, and he was a lovely man, but spent the time, I was driving him. And I remember that my windshield wipers didn't work very well. Here I am driving the president of Microsoft around, and it's sleeting, and it's just horrible Canadian weather. But all he wanted to know was, what did I want to do next? What was I thinking about? And, I was so absorbed trying to really build up this Microsoft Canadian presence and traveling across this very wide but very narrow customer base across Canada, that I hadn't spent as much time on it as I should. So after he left, I really did think about what did I want to do next. But I never got a chance to really answer that question, because there became very apparent that Microsoft product support was really a challenge for the company's reputation. Mike called me up and said, you probably need to take this job in product support, because we need someone who will figure out how to change the customer experience rapidly and radically. And I thought, well, that's an interesting challenge. And it would get me back to Seattle. So I came back to run product support and try to answer that puzzle about how can you scale support for customers as rapidly as Microsoft software presence was scaling. In addition, we began to ask the question, but how could we reduce the number of incidents of support? Because you don't want to just keep growing and ignore the fact that the ideal support experience is one that never happens, right? That the usage is more smooth. And so working with the product teams on that issue and with learning how do you do customer service? How can we outsource customer service? How can we scale customer service? How do we hire for the perfect customer service? Was a really interesting challenge for the next 2 years. When I got there, the way to deal with the long wait times and how angry people were was to take people off the phone a lot, to give them a break a lot. And it was actually exacerbating the problem. And we had to find ways that people felt empowered. One of the things that was so disempowering for the people on the support line was that nobody was fixing the software. Well, we needed to rethink this and put the value on, yes, problem resolution, but also feedback to the software group. And so having the people on the phone lines realize that they were that way that Microsoft could be connected directly to customer feedback, and that the customer feedback was making it all the way to the front line of the person speccing the product or the person fixing the product was very, very much a culture change within product support and helped everybody in the necessary effort to work harder, scale faster. We had built a great team of leaders in product support. I was very confident that we were opening an operation in Dallas. We'd opened an operation in North Carolina. The Seattle team was world class. The partnership with the product teams was very strong. And Mike Maples, again, came and said, we really could use you in the consumer, what was then the consumer division. And it had the hardware and consumer and small business products. And for me, it was a chance to go into product development as well as the marketing and take what I had learned by being exposed to many, many customers, both in the setting in Canada, but also in product support, and see how to translate that in the product development cycle. And the consumer division was a very, very special place at Microsoft. I always say that if you got a whole lot of important strategic corporate work done, those weren't my products. But if you had a lot of fun, those were mine. Because the consumer division, whether it was the mouse or the keyboard or the games work or the CD-ROM and educational products or the small business products, and Microsoft Publisher was just a revelation with this idea of using wizards to allow us all to be great publishers. Those were products that were really bringing the power of computing down to the individual level and coming into all aspects of our lives. And I thought that was a great opportunity, a great privilege, and a great team. In the consumer division, it was, what do people want? What do people want to be? What do they want to experience? It was a broader remit, right? So whether it was, creating McPhee to entice young kids to be creative on the computer, not just passive learners, or it was the production of CD-ROMs about music and wonderful ideas that could be translated on cooking and others, or it was the ability for all of us to become great newsletter publishers with Microsoft Publisher. There was just this broader remit to the creativity that was what do people want to be? What do they want to learn? And, by necessity, the people doing the business software were much more about need and productivity, and we were about fulfillment and enjoyment and kind of extending our natural skills by the use of these magic microcomputers that were becoming more and more prevalent in the home as well as in the office. I first received the VP title in product support because of the necessity and importance and scale of what needed to be done there. But I think I really became a full-fledged executive team member when I joined the consumer division, because Microsoft was always a place that puts a very high value on invention and innovation. And so that was my first real opportunity to be present at that table where we were inventing and creating new ways for people to actually use these miraculous computers. And I was the only woman at the table at that time, which made it very interesting. But I was a woman who was raised in a family of 9 with 5 brothers, and so I found my voice fairly quickly. But the executive team was really small and tight and very technical for the most part. So I was one of the least technical members of that team and had to utilize the fact that I had always walked that line between those who were consuming the technology and those who were building the technology, and became a kind of an expert bridge in that space and the voice often of the consumer of our product in the executive team discussions. I think one of my most important contributions was seeing that you could still be fierce and collaborative, community-oriented, a mentor, really building the team, and that you could hold on to that fierceness, that determination, that really hard work ethic, while still having a workplace that considered the whole person and embraced different styles of leadership and management. I think the consumer division, or the interactive media division, had the widest range of types of leaders and managers who found their place, found their voice, found their strengths in building and innovating products at Microsoft. People often said to me, as if it was a point of pride, "Well, you were the highest ranking woman at Microsoft." And I said, this is not something to be proud of. This is something where you would hope there was a crowd, that there was competition, that there was for that designation, that was, incrementally, there were 3 women over here and 3 women over here, and who got the senior VP was just incremental or coincidental to the opportunity. But I was really standing alone for a period of time when there were no other women in those very senior ranks. And there was a certain loneliness to it. And it wasn't just gender, but it was style. It was commitment to different kinds of family responsibilities. Even in the time since I left in 1997, I think the role of the dad in the household has changed and become much more important. But at the office, I was trying to juggle a significant number of commitments to my family alongside the commitments to Microsoft, and taking both of those very, very seriously. And it was almost more about style and familial responsibilities that caused stress than it was strictly about gender. There were other executives who believed in a more collaborative style, who believed in invention has to come from all levels of the organization, and we need to hear from people in a different way and appreciate different voices. But I got a lot of credit for that. In part, I got noticed because of my gender, so got a lot of credit for having a different management style. There were others who shared that style who were men, but the presence of a woman and the difference in style was very remarkable. The internet went from being mostly a walled garden with AOL and even early efforts at Microsoft to this wide open idea where things were just moving so rapidly that need to be inventors and to ask constantly, how will travel change? Thus, Expedia. How will access to news change? How will political commentary change, the creation of Slate, here, which was a huge change for me personally, as well as for the world of political dialogue. Those kinds of things were just wide open. And we were out looking and talking to creative people around the country and around the world about what kind of information, what kind of products would they see in the future that would empower people, engage people, delight people, based on this idea of a computer on every desk and in every home. Well, I think the idea of the personal computer as a creativity tool was probably the most important thing that came out of the interactive media division, as a knowledge tool, not just a corporate productivity tool, but as this broader creative and knowledge tool, and the constant need to be examining what kind of knowledge are we facilitating, that knowledge, what kind of creativity are our tools as well as our products facilitating that creativity, was a very big contribution made by the interactive media division. One of the best stories of my latter part of my career at Microsoft was that this very geeky political editor named Michael Kinsley came for an interview. And so suddenly this guy who's on TV 5 nights a week and renowned for his journalism was put through the traditional Microsoft interview process where people are drilling down. And at the end of his day, at that time, there was always an opening on your calendar, and it's listed as appropriate. And if all these people who've been drilling down all day are saying higher, higher, higher in the email they send afterwards, then they send in an executive to turn you around. And if you were thinking we were kind of jerks by that point, to be very nice and very friendly and talk to you about what it would take to get you to join Microsoft. And I was Michael Kinsley's as appropriate. And it was the first time that I met him and the first time that he met a nice person from Microsoft. And so he thought I was amazing. And it was years later before I explained to him that that was my job that day, was to go in and be amazing, so that he would decide to come and create Slate at Microsoft. But I was nearing my 40th birthday. I had started at Microsoft when I was 30. I was headed to 40. I had a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old. And I realized it was time for me to move on. And I chose to do that at the end of 1997, giving lots of notice, and realized that I still had a lot of creativity in me. And one of the partnerships that we'd built in the interactive media division was with the folks at DreamWorks, and they called and asked me to join them. So my intention was to go to DreamWorks and help them with their digital movie making. In my going away party, Bill was very emotional on stage about my departure. He'd been very perturbed with me. It wasn't an easy discussion, and he'd been very perturbed. But on stage at the going away, he said very nice things about me, but also said that the only good thing was that he didn't have to be the person in between Steve Ballmer and Patty Stonesifer anymore, because Steve and I had more than our share of disagreements. And but he was very sweet and very nice. And as he got off stage, I said, I hope someday we'll work together again. He said, could you come see me on Monday? I have an idea. And I couldn't go see him on Monday. I was doing stuff for DreamWorks already by that time. But when I did go, he said, Microsoft has been doing this thing with libraries and giving computers to libraries, but Melinda and I were thinking that we could do something much bigger. And I'd been working with Melinda in the interactive media division, and she had since retired and was getting ready to raising their family. And I thought, this is really intriguing, and asked him, what if we were to do this at a completely different scale? Suppose we did 5,000, 10,000 libraries. And he just leaned in and said, suppose we did all of them, what would happen? And what his intention and Melinda's intention was to take it outside of Microsoft and use it as a cornerstone of their interest in really beginning to scale their philanthropy. And so I joined Bill Gates Sr. in helping in the very early years of them figuring out their philanthropy and what eventually became the Gates Foundation. When young people ask me about what did I learn in those early years, I say that I have a bias towards yes. That the idea that in that less than a decade, I moved countries, I moved jobs, I took on things I knew a great deal about to start and then knew almost nothing about. I made incredible relationships, but having a bias towards yes, to go ahead and take the personal risk, because what's the worst thing that can happen, really is an important attribute of what I learned at Microsoft, what I was rewarded for at Microsoft, but most importantly, what I then took out into the rest of my career, which is that new experiences, even those experiences with a lot of risk to them, because you'd have to stretch and become in new ways, are worth that, because we only live once, we only get one shot at it, and coming into a place that is in great need and trying to see what you can do to fill those needs is a great opportunity and shouldn't be overlooked. Just say yes.